Hey YouTube, what's up? It's Michael here again. Thanks for joining me. So this week we are going to be talking about Warbreaker. I believe this is the second to last of the major Cosmere books that I need to read. I think Elantris is the last one I have left. I know he has that superhero book that is technically in the Cosmere, but from everything I understand, that's more of a side story. I might get to it eventually. Steelheart, is that what it's called? I might be wrong. Warbreaker, that's what we're here to talk about. So I will say Warbreaker is a solid fantasy book. It is definitely in the upper end of the bell curve in terms of fantasy as a genre, but I won't say it's Brandon's best work. I will say it is above Mistborn Era 2, though, as a whole. Let's talk about Warbreaker and why it goes there specifically. So right away, within the prologue, I found myself a little more confused than I'm used to with Brandon's openings. He usually does leave you with some questions right off the bat because he wants you to have a reason to keep reading and he's going to answer them throughout the novel. But normally I at least have kind of a feeling of where the book is trying to take me. With this one I really didn't. The prologue, you can tell, and I think he even confirms it in the annotations, but you can tell once you read the first couple chapters afterwards that the prologue was written specifically to give you an introduction to the magic system. Despite that, after the prologue, and really even after finishing the book, I found myself still pretty confused with the magic system. I will say it is probably his most confusing magic system that I've read so far. I don't really find myself having a clear understanding of where the floor and the ceiling are of its abilities. I have a vague understanding of the mechanics, because he does do his best to describe those, but I don't feel like I know how far those mechanics can go like I normally do with Allomancy or the magic in Stormlight, So it's not my favorite of his magic systems, but it is interesting, and it's not bad or anything. I'm not trying to trash it. It is well written and interesting, just not as clear and concrete as I'm used to from Sanderson, which may actually be to your liking. Maybe you like a softer magic system, and if you're interested in reading Sanderson, then this might be the book for you, because it is a bit softer in terms of the magic than he usually does. Aside from that, though, the plot itself, I find myself a little bit conflicted on, mostly because in retrospect, after having finished the novel, I find myself having a great deal of respect for the narrative and how well Brandon seeded all of the plot points and threaded everything together at the end. This is definitely his, I would argue, the twistiest of his stories. He does try to subvert your expectations quite a few times in this book, more so than he does in most of his narratives. And he executed that fantastically. He did that really well. And everything, when it was revealed, it always had that click of, oh crap, I should have seen that coming. He laid out all those puzzle pieces, but they just weren't juxtaposed in a way that made it click for me until he wanted it to. So, he wrote that and plotted it out fantastically. But at the same time, while reading it, and this is one of the risks you run while doing a narrative like that, while reading it, I found myself often very frustrated with the pacing. Brandon often gets accused of having slow starts to his books, and I would argue that the entirety of this book, up to and mostly even through the ending, feels like the whole thing is a slow start. It honestly feels like a 600-page lead up to what the novel's going to be. At least it did to me, and that may just be an issue of my expectations for a story clashing with the reality of what the author wrote, which does sometimes happen. So my opinions on that might change if I ever reread it, but this is just how I feel after a first reading. So yeah, the plot, like I said, I'm a little bit conflicted on, because afterwards you do see how everything is tied together and how well he plotted everything out. You really can see that after you have all the pieces, but while you're still getting the pieces, it can be a very frustrating experience, because you just kind of feel like, when is this going to start? When am I going to start seeing the actual picture that I'm looking for? Moving past my issues with the plot itself, the character work, as usual with Brandon, is pretty fantastic. It's not his absolute best, but it's definitely up there. I'll start with the side characters. The character I probably have the biggest issue with, and it's the only one I really have any issue with, is Vasher. I really don't feel like he got a lot of development until the last 30 or 40% of the book, and even then, you really don't get as much information or feeling for him as a character as I would have liked, especially being a Stormlight reader and having heard his name from Stormlight, and knowing that I was going to learn about that, I was hoping to get more information about that little tiny piece of the Cosmere, and the book just didn't quite deliver to the degree that I wanted it to. But again, that could just be a clashing of my expectations with the reality of what the author wanted. So keep all of that in mind. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. But all the other characters, aside from that, and even with Vesher for the most part, they're all very well written, very well realized people. The two main protagonists and the tertiary side protagonists, I absolutely love, especially the two main ones, the sisters, Ciri and Vivenna. Ciri, in particular, is probably my favorite of all of the characters in this book. I just love her story. I am not normally somebody who even really wants a romance in the books I'm reading at all. I don't care for it. I don't think most people write them well. I usually find them slow, boring, and awkward at best. But there is just something about the way that Brandon writes his romances, and it's consistent throughout most of the books I've read. It's with Ven and Alan, Adeline and Shallan, and now Ciri, and he's got a really silly name that I can't remember. But if you've read the book, you know who I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil too much. It's just so earnest the way he writes the romances that I can't help but enjoy it. He's not trying to write the sexiest love story of all time. He's just trying to write two people, coming to get to know each other and falling in love through that. It's a little bit dicey in the way it starts, a little bit concerning. But it really does end up being really cute and earnest, and I really enjoyed it. Vivenna's side of the story is a little bit the opposite of that. It is dark, it is difficult, and she gets put through the freaking ringer in this book. I don't know what grudge Brandon had against this character, but he did not show her a lot of mercy. She really learns a lot about how dark and deep the world can get when you're heading towards rock bottom. And there were parts of her story that I honestly found difficult to read, and found myself having to put the book down at parts, which is a part of the reason that it took me longer to read than I expected. But despite that, that's not to say that she was poorly written. She's fantastically written, and that's part of why it was difficult to read, because she is such a well-realized character, and you do feel her pain with her, and then she goes through so much pain where you're like, it hurts. I don't want to hurt right now, so you put the book down and come back later. She's not my favorite. I'd say out of the three main characters, she's probably my third favorite, but she's still fantastic. I just don't feel like, aside from, I feel like most of the relatability with her character comes from what she goes through in the book. I don't feel like there's a lot to connect with her on aside from that, in terms of who she is before that. But I am interested to see where she goes if Brandon ever gets around to writing the sequel. The tertiary protagonist, Lightsong, I found myself wishing he had more to do throughout the story, because I really liked his character, and I liked the way he would interact with everybody around him. And it was one of those situations, again, where it turns out he had more to do than I thought he was going to, but you couldn't see it right up until the end when it happened. And so it's one of those other issues of the twisty narrative that Sanderson, I think, was trying to go for here. But still, he's fantastically well written, and learning about him is probably my favorite part of the book. But just in terms of the actual experience of reading the character, he's my second favorite behind Ciri. I loved her so much. She's fantastic. All the other side characters, the priests and the mercenaries and all of them, fantastically well written. I don't want to go through all of them, because then I feel like we're definitely going to be getting into spoiler territory. But just take me at my word when I say there's not a character in this book that I feel like wasn't well written. There's I guess there is that one exception who didn't really get a chance to do or be anybody, but I don't feel like that detracted from the book. I barely even noticed it. The character work is definitely at least on par with Brandon's other work. I wouldn't put it below anything other than probably Stormlight. I would say it's on par at least with the Mistborn original trilogy as a whole in terms of character work, especially if he ever gets around to writing the sequel. I am very interested to see where these characters go from here, because this definitely, like I said, felt like a really long lead up to a larger story, and I feel like I would enjoy the sequels to this book if they existed more than this book itself. So final thoughts, I definitely think the book is a solid 6 out of 10. It's above average, but it's not the best of the best. I'm not going to put it in my top 10 fantasy books of all time. I'll definitely recommend Mistborn or the Stormlight Archive before I recommend Warbreaker. The one thing I will recommend Warbreaker for is if you are trying to read through the Cosmere specifically for the Cosmere, because you find that concept interesting and you want to read about it as a connected universe, I would say read Warbreaker before you read Stormlight, just because I feel like the information you get would be better served to you in that order than the order I got it, with Stormlight before Warbreaker. But I don't feel like it's a huge detractor from the overall experience if you choose to read it the way I did. So anyway, thanks again for watching, joining me for another week. Next week, I should have another video up, hopefully before Friday, because I should be done with the book before then. I'm reading through To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, so that should be my next video. Anyway, I will see you hopefully next week, but at the very least, next time.